Ever been curious about the background of your favorite Naraka hero? Perhaps you haven't been able to finish their cultivation, or want to learn about a hero you don't plan to play. Welcome to the Naraka Legends lore series, where we tell the heroic tales of each character verbatim from the in-game chapters. Join us on today's quest as we delve into the history of Feria Shen, the Powderkeg. It had been a relief for the Valthika since Feria Shen left the Valthika and headed to Firearms Division. It was then a celebration for the Firearms Division that Feria Shen left the division and headed to Cloud Sparrow. However, when people in the Valthika and Firearms Division realized that Feria had long gone, they sometimes murmured her name unconsciously. It was a relief to breathe fresh air. Feria Shen had spent the last 9 days below deck, huddled alone in the dark cargo hold of a ship cutting its way from Icuria to Herring Gull City. The voyage had been uneventful, naught but steady winds and calm seas, a blessing for the crew, but agony for her. She had brought books to pass the time, but had read them front to back in a matter of days, left with nothing but the thoughts in her head and the crashing of waves against the merchant ship's hull. A week in, she'd considered coming out of hiding. The ship was far enough from Icuria by then that there was no turning back, even if the presence of a young noblewoman was revealed. It would have been nice to talk with the crew, and especially with old Ping Shen, the gentle, kind soul who'd been sent to negotiate the latest purchase of arms. The young girl's purpose, however, was to explore the ports, and she'd worried that Fi Ping learned of her stowing away. He would confine her to the ship when they finally docked. So she'd stayed put, eating stale bread, rereading the same stale stories, and fighting of rats that seemed to think her makeshift quarters were their own. When the ship had reached dry land, it had been all she could do not to bolt. Feria had squirmed as the bustle of sailors docking died down, but when she thought it safe, she had scrambled from her damp nook and clambered to the surface. The brightness had hit her like a wall of water, almost knocking her down as her eyes adjusted to the first sunlight she'd seen in nearly 2 weeks. But as her vision had returned and she gulped the fresh air blowing in from the open sea, she knew her voyage had been worth the difficulty. Herring Gull City stretched for miles in all directions. It was densely packed with beige sandstone buildings, the likes of which she had never encountered before. Some crowned with ornate spiral steeples, and others girded with carved pillars painted in vibrant crimson and turquoise. The streets were paved with the same sandstone, lined with verdant palms and splashing fountains. And where the city ended, the desert began. To her eyes, it seemed more like a force than a landscape, the sand a creeping menace that had to be battled daily to keep it from swallowing everything. The crew had retracted the gangplanks to keep passers-by from boarding uninvited, but Feria found a rope that bound the ship to the pier and climbed down. As she made her way into the hustle and bustle of the docks, the splendor of Lunazra was replaced by the gritty reality of the port. Hard-faced men with limps and scars and strange accents bartered aggressively with one another, trading everything from fish to pickaxes to reams of silk. She had been worried that a girl of 12 would be looked upon with suspicion, but these merchants were too occupied to care. In fact, there were even children selling wares of their own. Once she swore she spotted a young girl whose features marked her a citizen of the Icurian dynasty like herself, but when she tried to get a closer look, the girl fled into the crowd. Eventually, Feria worked up the nerve to speak with someone. She approached a one-armed trader and asked him where she could find a gun. Though he laughed and boomed that a young girl should find more appropriate toys, he nevertheless pointed her toward the area where firearms were traded. It was where Ping Shen would be. So as she approached, she took extra caution to keep her face hidden beneath her tattered black hood. The old man was too sweet for such a harsh city. He was used to the safety of the palace walls and traders he could trust. But out here, Feria could already tell, scam and deception were an ever-present part of doing business. When she came upon him, he was speaking with a gangly merchant whose thin brown hair was pulled back into a ponytail. "You're clearly a man who appreciates the finer things." He was flattering, gesturing at Ping's elaborately stitched silk robes. Then he handed the old man a rifle, who turned it over to inspect the polished wood and sturdy steel bracings. "Just look at this craftsmanship and tell me it isn't beautiful. You will kill your enemy and look good doing it." It was true the craftsmanship was of the highest quality, Feria noticed from her hiding place behind a barrel of fish. The problem was that the technology was 2 generations out of date. Newer muskets could fire 30 meters further than the model Ping held, and in a full-scale battle that difference would mean life or death. A 100-year-old sword could kill as well as any modern blade, but an outdated firearm was practically worthless. "So what do you think?" goaded the merchant as he pried the lid off one crate, then another. Both were filled with muskets, the same well-made, but antique, design as Ping currently held. "I've got 200 here and can have another 100 by the end of the day. For a man of your stature, I'll even cut you a deal." The young girl had not wanted to intrude. She had so many plans for the day. Plans to see the famous Lunazra fire spitters and sample the spice markets whose smells wafted in on the eastern wind. But it pained her to watch the old man get swindled, especially when he had always treated her kindly, and especially because she had such extensive knowledge of the weapons he was attempting to acquire. So, as the deal was coming to a close, she leapt out to stop it. "Feria?" exclaimed Ping, confused. "Has my mind gone soft? Or is it really you?" She grabbed the baffled old man by the sleeve and dragged him away, much to the chagrin of the gangly merchant. "Little girl, the adults were talking! Don't be rude!" he protested, but Feria whirled on him in a rage. "You're the cheat and a swindler," she growled, "and you should be ashamed." "See, preposterous! My goods are outdated," she snapped, but still the merchant pleaded. "Come now, you'll find no better deal for such fine weapons. Half of. For such a valued customer, I can even offer half off." Feria judged that grabbing the man's ponytail and cutting it right off might give Ping a heart attack. So she swallowed her anger and continued leading the old man through the crowds. She explained everything on the way, from the details of her stowaway adventures to the fact he had almost been scammed out of every piece of gold he carried. 9 days below deck, he kept repeating, and I had no idea. Perhaps his mind really was going soft. Thankfully, instead of demanding she return to the ship, he accepted her help. People called Feria arrogant, but she thought that unfair. It was hardly her fault she always knew what she was talking about. After speaking with several merchants, she found a trustworthy woman whose wares were of the highest quality and, most importantly, the latest technology. She let Ping fumble through the price negotiations while she picked up one of the soon-to-be-purchased rifles and raised it to her shoulder. Though still a girl, Feria was a better marksman than half the professional soldiers in her family employ. Perhaps as thanks, the old man would let her keep one to sharpen her skills. With the deal finished, servants arrived to collect the goods and return them to the ship. The voyage had been a success, and it had all been thanks to the young noblewoman. As they headed back, Ping even allowed a detour for her to explore the city. They caught a street-side performance by fire spitters, which she found frankly underwhelming, and the spiced chicken they ate for lunch exceeded its reputation. When finally they returned to the ship, Feria marveled at how different the city had been from her expectations. "I even saw a girl who looked like me," she mentioned casually. "Around my age, I think, and from Icuria, too. At least her face made me think so. I had no idea our people lived here." That caught Ping's attention, and he shot her a dark glare. "Our people don't," he huffed. "The only Icurians here are traitors." When Feria asked what that meant, he refused to elaborate. But she could tell she had touched on something, for the old man finished the journey back in silence, his mind churning with troubled thoughts. The merchant ship had no hope of outrunning the sleek vessel that pursued it, but that did not stop the crew from trying. For half a day they tacked back and forth, catching puffs of dying wind in a desperate attempt to lose the pirates at their backs. In the end, it was their own ship that betrayed them, the hull bulky and packed heavy with goods from the port. Little by little, the pursuing vessel closed the distance, and finally it pulled up alongside. The merchantman entertained the thought of resistance only until the ship raised its gunport windows to reveal rows upon rows of cannons, at which point the exhausted sailors decided to take their chances at being boarded. If they fought, death was guaranteed. If they surrendered, perhaps their losses would only be monetary. Feria had watched it all with ill-hidden excitement. Though old Ping Shen had tried several times to shoo her into hiding, the scene unfolding now was like her books made real, and there was no way she was going to miss it. Crouched behind a row of crates, she saw the merchantmen laying down their swords, then the pirates dropping ramps to board. The young girl was so enthralled with the drama that she did not hear the clomping of heavy boots behind her, and only when the pirates grabbed her did she scream. Thankfully, they were not interested in bloodshed. The pirate captain, an imposing woman named Valda, whom they called the Sea Dragon, ordered her men to loot the vessel from bow to stern. Her demands were clear. Anything that shimmered, anything that could be melted down, and every last item they had purchased in Herring Gull City. When that was finished, she gathered the merchant vessel's crew and passengers to look them over. Most, she announced eventually, most would be freed. A small few would be taken for ransom. Noble Ping stepped forward to offer himself at this, but the Sea Dragon proved quite knowledgeable of Icurian politics, and, much to his embarrassment, turned him down. The old man carries the Shen name, but he is not truly one of them, she explained to her officers, as Ping hung his head and shuffled back amongst the captives. I doubt the family would pay much for his return, and besides, a man his age and bearing won't be long at sea. The girl, however, Valda gestured to Feria with her chin, though it was hardly necessary. Her presence was hard to miss. Even without her palace silks, she was clearly of noble birth. For her, the Shens will pay graciously. Ugh, Ping sputtered, worried protests, but they were lost amidst the commotion of the young girl trying to claw and bite her captors as they dragged her away. It had been a week since they had left Ping Shen and his merchant ship, sails shredded and stocks pilfered, bobbing alone on the open sea. Besides Feria, the pirates had taken a Lunazra man named Hadi, a brilliant engineer and, like her, a lover of firearms. It was a small comfort, for in the days before the raid they had bonded over the mutual interest. She had spent hours pestering him on everything from ballistics to the ideal composition of gunpowder. So as much as she dreaded her captivity, at least she had him for company. She had originally planned not to cooperate with her captor's attempts at extortion, but a conversation with Hadi during the week had changed her mind. Try to remember everything I've taught you, or the knowledge will be lost, he'd mourned, face swollen from a beating by a drunken swabby. Unlike you, I shall have no freedom. Nonsense, Feria had scoffed. You also come from riches. Surely they will find a price for your return. He had given a bitter, sad laugh, then shaken his head. Sweet child, you know not the complexities of this world. My people view me as a criminal. They will let me die rather than pay? Hadi had refused to explain further, but her mind had been set since. Not only would she cooperate, but she would free him too. This sweet child was not as naive as he thought. Morning light glimmered off the Icurian rooftops as the coast came into view. The unsinkable Naga dropped its sails, and the Sea Dragon ordered her men to bring Feria above deck. By the end of today you will be returned, assured the mighty captain with a smirk. As long as your grandfather is not stingy. The young girl gazed longingly out at the sight of her home on the horizon. After so many weeks away, she would have given almost anything for a warm, dry bed and ground that didn't troll beneath her feet. But she could not forget about her friend. No, she found herself saying. I will not leave. You will not leave? Valda repeated, dumbfounded. Few were the prisoners who wished to remain in her captivity. Not without Hadi, Feria affirmed. I have taken a liking to him and want to bring him home with me. He can be a jester for my family or a tutor for me, perhaps both. The crew could not help but chuckle at her arrogance. That man has a family of his own, the Sea Dragon scoffed. They will want him returned. His family will leave him to rot, the girl huffed. If you don't believe me, ask him yourself. And while his family won't pay, mine will. I can make sure you get both our ransoms and then some. Valda's good eye narrowed in suspicion. After a moment, she disappeared below deck. I used to have a pet kitten, Feria told the pirates as they waited for their captain's return. But this would be so much better, don't you think? She received no response, the crew doubtless reflecting on the insanity of noble lives. It was not long until the Sea Dragon emerged from the darkness of the cabin. The girl speaks the truth, she confirmed, lips pursed. But now comes the matter of paying for him. I doubt your grandfather will be as generous as you. What reason have you to trust a child's word? Don't worry, he'll pay. Oh, Feria smiled mischievously, eyes glittering. I just need help from one of your men. This is crazy, the swabby screamed as two of his crewmates rolled up his sleeve. There has to be another way. I told you, my grandfather is a stubborn man, chided Feria, who stood next to the sea dragon and her men. The cook approached and removed a stained cloth from around a cleaver, which he handed to his captain. He'll never cooperate without incentive. Send a finger wrapped in one of my scarves, though, and he'll pay whatever you ask. But it's my finger, protested the small man, his eyes growing large at the sight of the rusted blade. He won't know the difference, the young girl insisted, as the pirates pressed the swabby's exposed hand onto a crate. Besides, return me safely and he'll forget the whole thing. I really do come home less a finger. I guarantee he won't stop until all of you are dead. This way, you can have your cake and eat it too. What about my cake? The swabby trembled. But Feria had little sympathy. This was the drunk who had taken to beating Hadi. He was also the only crewmate small and slender enough to convincingly pass off a child's finger. It was fate, really. Now don't move, Falda ordered, or I might miss. She raised the cleaver and the whole ship went silent. A gentle wind lapped at the sails, waves sloshed against the hull, and in the distance a seagull cried. Then the blade whistled through the air. Brutal, remarked Hadi, pulling the oars of the small wooden vessel the captain had given them for their return to the Icurian coast. I didn't know you had it in you. Guilt had begun to creep over Feria after the deed was done, but it was short-lived. The swabby had gotten drunk and begun laughing with his mates only minutes later, boasting proudly of his valiant sacrifice. Even now, after the swap had been made and the unsinkable Naga was receding into the distance, she could hear his booming voice across the water belting songs of courage and heroism. Besides, it had only been half a pinky. It worked, didn't it? She smiled. Hadi chuckled and nodded. For that I must thank you. You could easily have left me. Feria shrugged and looked out to the horizon. The sun was starting to set, and the torches of the Icurian streets were winking into view. She would sleep well tonight, with dry sheets in a bed warmed by the fire. Hadi would too, and for that she was just as happy, even if she tried not to show it. Just one thing, the man interrupted her thoughts with a grin. I must insist. Let's not go around calling me your jester. Feria tugged at the hemp rope around her wrists and felt it start to give. The bandits hadn't even tied her up right, and where was the fun in that? She had left the city walls in search of a challenge, but this was hardly it. No, this was too much like her grandfather's arms men. She had crossed swords with even the most senior of her family's guards and sent them all sulking away in defeat. And it wasn't just swords. When it came to a contest of firearms, none even dared compete with the young noble. It was amazing how many rifles were suddenly jammed or in need of new parts whenever she entered the room. The bandits, it now seemed, would offer little more adventure than the 20-year-old was used to at home. Earlier that morning, Feria snuck out before sunrise, wrapped in a dirty patchwork cloak snatched from one of her servants. She headed west toward the mountains, where the cobblestone roads turned to dirt as they weaved through dense forest. It was here that bandits roamed. The young noble knew it was dangerous to seek out such violent men, but she worried the daily slog of home life might just as soon kill her from boredom. She decided to play the damsel in peril. It was a character she had encountered often in her books, and the damsel always seemed to attract the attention of villains, which was exactly what she wanted. So as dawn broke, and the golden sun peeked from behind the mountains, the young woman began to whimper and sob, twisting her face in terror as she called out for help. Unsurprisingly, it took all of 10 minutes for the bandits to appear. She feigned her escape as they reached out to grab her, but it turned out that even while pretending she easily evaded them, so she doubled back to give them another chance. Finally, one of them got hold of her, and when he pulled her close, she could hear him wheezing with exhaustion. Pathetic, Feria thought, as they carried her off into the mountains. The bandits brought her to their camp and tied her up, and there she saw the rest of their party, 7 in total, each as unimpressive as the next. They argued over what to do with the Peasant Girl. Some suggested ransom. Others wanted to keep her as a cook. One even suggested they set her free, claiming a prisoner was too much trouble. Little did he know he was right. Feria had almost fallen asleep to the sounds of their bickering, but a rustle from the woods startled them all into quiet. Worried they had been followed, the bandits split up to search the area, leaving the tied-up young woman with a single guard to watch over her. Within minutes, the guard had produced a bottle of foul-smelling alcohol and was guzzling it like water. It wasn't much longer until he lay back against a tree and began to snore. Now, it would be too easy to sneak away, and not at all the adventure she craved, So as Feria wiggled out of her ropes, she formulated a plan. Instead of defeating the bandits herself, she would turn them against each other. One of the men had shown of a sterling tea kettle he'd stolen from a merchant. So she opened his bag, removed it, and placed it in the bag of another. Perhaps if she could sow suspicion among the group, she could slay 7 without even drawing her sword. But as 1 hour turned into many, it became apparent that the bandits were not returning. Perhaps danger has actually befallen them, Feria wondered, as she left the now drooling guard alone in the camp. She climbed down the steep, rocky path that led back into the forest, then crept over dirt and dry leaves, following the bandits' footprints. After a few minutes of tracking, she heard voices in the distance. "I swear, we aren't no bandits," claimed one of them. As Feria neared, she slipped behind a pine tree, hiding herself from view as she took in the scene. 2 soldiers in fine armor stood over the pleading bandits, who were bound and laying on the ground. "We even rescued a lost peasant girl." "And what about these?" retorted one of the soldiers, a stern and humorless man, as he pulled open the bandit's bag to spill sterling utensils onto the ground. "You rescue these as well?" "In a way," replied the bandit, unable to hold back a grin. "Just keeping them safe for a while?" "It sounds like these men could use a visit to the city jail," mused the other soldier, who had strong, dark eyes, a handsome face, and messy hair beneath his helm. "For safekeeping!" Rage boiled up inside of Feria. Who did these men think they were, spoiling her plans? "And what about the peasant girl?" asked the humorless soldier. Become the legend you were destined to be. If you enjoyed this video, please help grow the channel by liking and subscribing. See you on the battlefield, brave warrior.